Okay, we're going to continue on talking about frequency distributions and histograms, but this time we're going to move on and talk about relative frequency distributions and relative frequency histograms. But before we do, I want to take a look again at this distribution and our histogram dealing with our verbal IQ scores. So I want to point out that these bars on our histogram are correlating to counts of IQ scores that fell in our class ranges. So in other words, this first bar is correlating with a frequency count of 4. The second one was 10, 25 on our third one. Our highest frequency count was 43, 26, 8, 3, and then 2. And we recognize that we had a normal distribution, meaning it was reflexive or symmetrical around the center here, our highest frequency. But again, these bars are correlating with actual counts for these class intervals. So now we're going to move on. We're going to talk about a different set of data. We're going to be looking at the number of keys held by students. And so I've listed those numbers here. So this is actually raw data, whereas before I had summarized data in our chart. The data has been organized into a frequency distribution, so you can fill that in here. That's what this is right here, is our frequency distribution and a frequency histogram. And that's what this is right here. And that's what we did last time with our IQ score. So that part has been done for us. We need the total, basically, in order to create a frequency column in our distribution, as well as a relative frequency histogram. So that's our goal here, to create the relative frequency column as well as the relative frequency histogram. So going back to our raw data, we can look at that raw data and it's all jumbled. You can't see any pattern there. You don't know if there's a lot of 2s, 3s, 4s, and 9s. You really need to get it organized. And that's what the distribution of the table does for us here. It organizes it for us. One thing I want to point out is that we need to add up our frequencies. We have a total of 31 counts here. I want you to see that these frequency counts are identified over here on our frequency histogram. Our first one here, we had a count of 7 and 7. So I just want you to note that this y-axis comes from this column right here. These columns here, this is our x-axis. These are our number of keys held, and they correlate to these different, to our x-axis. Okay, so moving on, in order to create our relative frequency histogram, we're going to have to calculate the frequency of each of these. So I'm going to look at 7 divided by 31. In other words, to find out, that's how we find our the part of our population that had 1 or 2 keys was 7 out of the total of our population of 31, came out to be 0.23. We have the same thing going on down here. So this is just really workspace to help us calculate this, and I want to include this so that you recall how a proportion is calculated. The part divided by the total. And I don't know these off the top of my head. I'm copying them over. 2 divided by 31 is going to give us 0.06. 0 divided by 31 is going to give us 0. Okay, so we recognize that you could go ahead and move the decimal 2 places to the right and write that as 23%. But I want to warn you that most relative frequency histograms are going to have a y-axis that are going to have that relative frequency in decimal format. So this is the column that we are going to use here. So we can see that our proportions, our relative frequencies are anywhere from 0 up to the highest one of 0.35 or 35%. So I want to go ahead and break this into fourths here and go ahead and maybe label 0.10, 0.20, 0.30, and 0.40. So I'm just kind of breaking this into increments. Along my x-axis, again, this is just going to carry over So I've got 5 different classes here. So 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, 7 to 8, 9 to 10, and then beyond. Okay, so we had a relative frequency of, now when I look at this, this is 0.23. I'm going to label that about right here, and that was the same for the second one, so got my 2 columns here. The next one was up to 35, so that would be up to here. Next bar would be 0.13, about right here. And then 0.06 would be about right in here. Okay, so we can see that the histograms have the exact same shape. It's just the only thing that's changed is now we are listing our y-axis as relative frequencies. So that's really the big change there. So you recognize that the 31, the total of 31 frequency, 31 students relates to 100%. So really this column should add up to 100%. I'm trying to mimic kind of the things that you would be asked in your My Math lab. That wasn't too terribly hard. Going forward, this is a problem from the very beginning. Nothing is organized for us. We're going to have to create our frequency table, our relative frequency chart, as well as our histogram. So we're starting from scratch here. We have 65 randomly selected car salespersons were asked the number of cars they generally sell in 1 week. 14 people answered that they generally sell 3 cars, 19 generally sell 4 cars, 12 generally sell 5, 9 generally sell 6, 11 generally sell 7. Create a relative frequency table and a relative frequency histogram. So this is our goal, to create these 2 things. Okay, so we have to try to figure out which factor is going to go on which axis. And then once we've completed this, we're going to add a cumulative relative frequency column, as well as, well, we'll just go with the column. Okay, so we're going to back it up here. We have to figure out what goes where. So you're looking at this, you've got a lot of information, a lot of numbers. What I want to point out is that we have 65 randomly selected car salesperson. That's kind of an indicator that that is our total frequency right here. So that's helpful to know that. That's broken down into parts. We have 14 out of those 65 sold 3, 19 sold 4, 12 sold 5, 9 sold 6, 11 sold 7. We're going to create our relative frequency table from this. This is our frequency, our total frequencies. These are the different parts. So that's going to tell us these numbers, not necessarily numbers, but this information is going to be aligned on our y-axis. But it's going to be aligned in terms of a relative frequency, a portion of the total. So that gives us an idea there that this other information, the number of cars sold, that is actually our random variable. And that is going to be our x-axis. So this is going to be our y. This information generally will get to be our y-axis. So we're going to set this up. Our random variable is going to, or in other words, our x values are going to be 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Our counts of sales and our frequencies, our counts. In this case, it's our salesmen, the number of salesmen that gave the answer of 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. That's going to be 14. We had 19, 12 or 5, 9 sold 6, and 11 sold 7. Okay, when we add this up, that should add up to the 65 that we were given at the beginning. We want to have a column here for our relative frequencies. Now I'm going to put in here, just to remind you again, that we're going to take the 14, this part divide by this total, this part divide by this total, and so on. I'm being very detailed on this. You wouldn't necessarily have to be. This would be 0.22, 0.29, 0.18, 0.14, and 0.17. This should add up to be very close to 100%. If it's off, it's because we've rounded. Okay, I'm going to go over here and get my chart started, or my histogram started. Again, I'm going to have 5 different classes here. 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Now this time I can see the range of my relative frequencies. Again, I'm not doing my counts, I'm doing my relative frequencies because I'm trying to do a relative frequency histogram. They generate anywhere from 14% up to 29%. So I could probably break this into, 3 intervals here of 0.10, 0.20, 0.30. And again, I can go ahead and get started. The number that had 3 was 0.22, so that would be kind of right in here. 4 would be somewhere right in, pretty close to the 30. 5 is going to be 0.18, would be about here. And 0.14 perhaps here, and 0.17. Okay, so I don't have my bars made super swell, but this gives you an idea how to put that all together. So again, this is your number of cars, and this was your relative frequency along this axis. So something I wanted to leave a little more space here on is we're asked to create a cumulative frequency, relative frequency. Cumulative means up to that amount. So we're asking ourselves, what percentage of car salesmen sold up to 3? Well, that's going to be, there was only 22%. Up to 4 would include the total count for 3 and 4 would be the total of these 2 actual counts, or the total of these 2 actual percentages. So that would be 0.51. And up to 5 would include that we'd be adding up this amount. So we have a ratio of 69, 83, and this should total to be 100%. So this is our relative frequencies, our cumulative relative frequencies here, this last column that we created here. So that's the piece that was new to this problem, but I was really wanting to give you practice here was dealing with a problem where you're dealing with the raw data given to you. It's not organized in any fashion at all.